Many of you know this, I've said it before, but whenever anyone asks me a question about how Trish and I got together, sometimes some of you have sat in our lounge room and asked us that. How did you guys get together? And lately I try to actually not answer. I like to sort of sit back and see what Trish is going to say, because I always start the answer to that question. There's a reason why. Trish often doesn't engage. She'll look at me and simply roll her eyes. She knows what's coming. And by the way, she's not rolling her eyes at your question. Your question is a good question. We should ask that of each other. Married couples, I think it's wonderful. But it's because Trish knows how the story is going to begin. I was sitting up the front of the church, almost on the front seat, with my friends in Australia, and I kind of looked back towards the doors, towards the opening of the auditorium, and in was coming this stunning-looking girl walking into the auditorium with a biker jacket over her arm, a helmet in her hand, and if you're in the 80s, a jet black 80s flat top hairdo. Do you remember those? And immediately I looked at her and I said, my dad will not like that look at all. She's perfect. I said to my friends sitting beside me, do you see that girl walking in? And yeah, I said, I'm going to marry that girl. And after our first few dates, which we had, I introduced her to my dad. And he absolutely loved her. Like, she was the best thing ever. Nearly ruined the whole thing. And this week, actually, by God's amazing grace, 36 years later, this week we are celebrating our anniversary. And thank you. And let me tell you something. I am not giving you that story to give you some romantic ideal to imitate. I am not advocating love at first sight. I do not agree with that. I do not think single girls looking at girls walking into the auditorium, no matter whether they're really good-looking biker girls or not, that's not the way to choose your future bride. In fact, both Trish and I would say that whole thing, it's why she rolls her eyes at me, right? It's full of immaturity and foolishness. Imagine saying, and I did actually say it, imagine saying you're going to marry a girl at one sight. You don't even know what type of girl she is. And then being interested in someone when your perception is that your dad might not like the way that she looks. That's just not honouring to your parents either. So yes, I want to go back in time and I want to shake a little bit of sense into that 18-year-old kid who was crazy over a biker girl. Now, I don't want to shake him too hard because 36 years later, I still want him to marry that girl. I really want him to marry that girl. Now, today, we get a picture of God's providential call of a bride for a husband. I nearly wanted to entitle this sermon, How to Find a Wife. But there's more to this. There's so much more to this than that. It's God's providential call of a bride for Isaac, who is the son of promise, in the line to the ultimate son of promise. It's one of the many pictures from history, particularly here in Genesis, that force us to see how God's call of grace to his church is actually seen in the beauty of marriage. We're going to see God's sovereignty. We're going to see God's wonder of his steadfast love as he provides a bride for Isaac. It's going to be a direct picture of the way that God brings about his bride to his ultimate son of promise, the church to his son, Jesus. We're also going to see how God uses, though, through all of this picture, he uses this faithful guy, just this servant of Abraham who seems faithful and obedient and wise and mature. And we're going to learn some things about him too. And so in all of it, when I put all of it together, these 67 verses, I just want to say this to you today about 67 verses of Scripture in one chapter. We can trust that God works through his people to irresistibly call his bride. We can trust that God works through his people to irresistibly call his bride. Now, we only have this week and next week in the end of Abraham's life. Abraham, Genesis 24 and 25, he's old. He's coming towards his death. And that's what we have in the first verse. Look at the first verse of Genesis 24. Now Abraham was old, well advanced in years, and the Lord had blessed Abraham in all things. Now Abraham has lived a full and blessed life. And it's beautiful. And I think that blessing is more than just material. He certainly has been materially blessed by God. He's got a big household. He's got lots of livestock. He's wealthy in that way, but he has been blessed by so much more. Abraham has grown into having a solid, unwavering faith in God and his promises, and we're going to see that today. Abraham is seeing God's first fulfillment of his promises in the most wonderful way in the birth of Isaac, when there was no way that Sarah could have children. It was a miraculous birth. He's also been assured in his faith. He passed the test on Mount Moriah, and God showed him and assured him of his provision of the ultimate sacrifice for sin. God would provide a lamb, and God was assuring him of all of his promises. And the only thing left now for those promises to come through to fruition ultimately is for it to keep going through Isaac. Isaac needs a wife. He needs a wife. And so we're going to see how that will keep going now through to the ultimate offspring. This promise needs to keep still burning. So let's come to these first verses. I want to suggest this, that when we truly believe God's promises, we never stop acting on them. That's the first 8 verses. When we truly believe God's promises, we never stop acting on them. Now, I want to suggest to you that in this first section of verses in Genesis 24, Abraham is showing us an extraordinary trust in God's covenant promises. Here is where we see the unwavering faith. His faith has actually become his life. He's living and making decisions and acting by faith. It's actually happening. He's acting on what he believes. He's confident about what God is doing. And so from verse 2 through to verse 4, he gets his servant, this oldest servant in his house. It's possible that we've already met this guy. It's possible his name is Eliezer, a guy he put forward to be his heir at one point, and God said, no, he's not your true son. I'm wondering if that's the guy, but we don't know. But he is a man who has been with him for a very, very long time. This servant has seen it all. He knows his master. He's been part of his master's household. He's been circumcised in his master's household as a sign of the covenant. And as we go forward in this text, and we see so much in this servant, he gives us every sign that he's a true believer in the covenant promises of God. It's beautiful. No doubt why Abraham is picking this man to go do this amazing thing he wants him to do. He wants him to make a serious agreement to find Isaac a wife. But he does it in a way that you and I might think very, very strange. If you look at verse 2, look at the way that it's discussed here. Verse 2, put your hand under my thigh, the upper leg. Put your hand under my thigh. Now, I have to be really quite delicate in the way that I'm going to describe this. But Abraham is telling his servant to place his hand in a particular place that puts him, I want to suggest to you, in the duty of God's covenant promises. He's having him put his hand at the region of his body closest to where it bears the covenant sign. And so he's agreeing to covenantally go out on mission. He's saying, this is the seriousness of what I am doing. This is a covenant mission, a God's covenant promises mission. And if you've been with us through the life of Abraham, you've seen how Abraham has previously, even on his mission of believing God's covenant promises, he's failed a number of times, trying even to bring God's promises about in his own way. The ultimate example of that, right, was Ishmael with Hagar. So what we see here, though, is the opposite. Abraham's not varying. He's not wavering around. He is solidly believing God's covenant promises, and he's asking his servant to do the same thing. Verse 3 and 4, he asks his servant to swear by the Lord. All capitalized, that is the name Yahweh. That is the God of the covenant, the God of covenant promises for his people. And then he actually says who this God is, the God of heaven and the God of the earth. Abraham wants to make it really clear. God, this God who has made these promises, who you're going on mission for, is completely in control over everything, heaven and earth. He is then commissioning his servant for this task, for this God who is in control of it all. And he says, listen, I do not want you to take a wife from the Canaanites. I want you to get a wife for my son Isaac. Don't take him from the Canaanites. Go back to my kindred to find a wife for Isaac. But don't take it from the Canaanites. If you just have a look at those two things, that's pure faith, actually. This is pure faith. See, he believes that the Canaanites, because God has told him, the Canaanites are going to be judged out of the land. It hasn't happened yet. But God has promised that his offspring would inherit this land after the Canaanites were judged out of the land. It's Abraham's now by way of promise, but the actual land is not yet fully inherited. And why would he seek a wife for his son who is prolonging, who is the ongoing hope of the inheritance of this land? Why would he seek a wife for his son from people who are going to be disinherited from the land? Why would he join with that to be judged out of it? Abraham is completely believing God's promises. And so marrying into the Canaanites, it would undermine that, even though that would be the easiest thing to do because he's surrounded by Canaanites in this land. The easiest place to go to find a wife is those who are right around you, right? Right there. They're right there in front of you. No. His offspring will be sojourners until the Canaanites are judged out of the land, and then his offspring will inherit the land. So Abraham says, go to my country and kindred. Now I want you to look back with me. Just go back a couple of chapters to Genesis chapter 22 for a moment. And the context here at the very end of Genesis 22 is that Abraham, you'll remember a couple of weeks ago we went through this, had just taken Isaac up on Mount Moriah as a test that God put him through, where he was taking his son to sacrifice his son, knowing that he was going to come back to life somehow, but God spared Isaac and provided the ram for sacrifice. And then God assured, in his pass of the test, God assured Abraham of all of the incredible promises that he was going to have. And he said, surely I will bless you, surely I will multiply you, all of these things. It's an absolute. And then the last few verses that you read at Genesis 22 of these, now after these things it was told to Abraham, behold, Milcah also has borne children to your brother Nahor, Uz his firstborn, Buz his brother, Kemuel the father of Aram, Kesed, Hazo, Pildash, Jidlaph, and Bethuel. Bethuel fathered Rebekah. These 8 Milcah bore to Nahor, Abraham's brother. And Abraham, by the way, was told all about this family tree that was still his family tree through his brother Nahor back in the old country. It was told to Abraham. What does that mean? Abraham knew this in Genesis 22, at Genesis 24. Now, at the commissioning of his servant in Genesis 24, where he puts his hand under the thigh, Abraham knew that there was still a clan of his family around where God might supply a wife. And let me remind you, this is not like the Canaanites. The line that we went through in Genesis 11, which is the line of Shem, who is Noah's son, that goes all the way through to Abraham, is where God would keep his covenant promises through. Genesis 22, so he's going to take someone from that covenant line. Genesis 22 names Rebekah in that line as a legitimate daughter in that line. The last verse says that there were concubines about. She wasn't a daughter of the concubine, she was a daughter of Bethuel, who fathered Rebekah. So then, in verse 5 to 8, we get this question from the servant. And so the servant asks kind of a normal question. Okay, I go there and try to do this. What if the woman is not willing to follow me to this land? And he says, shouldn't I take Isaac with me? I mean, shouldn't she just at least see the guy and get to know the guy? What if she doesn't like him, right? What if it's not love at first sight? And Abraham says, no. In fact, he says, see to it that you do not take Isaac back. Under no circumstances, he's saying, is Isaac to go back there. Why? Why? Because again, here is Abraham trusting God's promises. God has told them that they're going to be sojourners in that land, that this is the inheritance that God is giving them, and they're going to sojourn until that time. There must be absolutely no chance of Isaac abandoning the land, the promise that God is going to give his offspring. What if he went there and he likes this girl and they don't want to come back and he stays there? What if? The what ifs are there, right? So his reply in verse 8, if she is not willing to follow, my faith is still in God's promise. He's staying here. Regardless. Now, we've seen Abraham do something other than that a couple of times in his lifetime. Here he's doing this. No matter what, Isaac's staying here. In fact, I will release you from this oath, but whatever you do, Isaac stays in the land of promise. Now, brothers and sisters, just as a start this morning, I just look at this and I just see such an important point for our Christian lives today. And I hope you'll see it with me. Please look very carefully at this. Abraham's actions, we must see this and we must know this about our Christian faith. Abraham's actions show that God's promises, his faith in God and his promises are not just theoretical. It's not just mental assent. Oh yeah, I think that's true. I think the Bible is true, but it doesn't actually affect my life. No, we actually live by faith. To live by faith means you make decisions by faith. It means you obey in those decisions. It means you walk in those decisions. We actually live life with real decisions and actions in this world right now based on our faith in God's future promises. It might sound different for us than for Abraham. It might sound like this: I won't compromise my Christian integrity to advance my career, because I trust that God has better for me than anything this job can offer. It might sound like I'm willing for my family, my kids or my extended family to be upset with me because I'm going to commit to gathering every Sunday with other believers because that's my first forever family. I'm willing to give more money to mission of the gospel from my finances rather than my own entertainment or other spending, because this is an investment in an eternity that I am going to be a part of. We live by faith, and it affects everything. Our lifestyle, our wallets, everything. You live in a way that says your faith is just not simply theoretical. And so when we believe God's promises, we never stop acting on them. One last thing that I want us to see before we move on is I want you to go back to verse 7. Just go back to verse 7 for a moment. And I want you to see how confident Abraham is. Abraham reassures his servant, because Abraham's decision about this, it's made on God's covenant promises, and he's confident that God will prepare the way for his servant before he even gets there. He says, God will send his angel before you. God will go before you. When you are going, when you know that you are in line with God's will, you are living by faith in his truth, and you are acting according to that, you can confidently know that God is going before you no matter what. Because God will bring about his purposes. Yes? Yes. So let's move on then to verse 9 to 27. We can prayerfully act in obedient faith, knowing God is in control. We can prayerfully act in obedient faith, knowing God is in control. Now, this servant immediately agrees. He places his hand under Abraham's thigh, takes the responsibility of this oath for the mission of God's covenant promises, and it's a 1,000-mile journey. The journey's not mentioned in the text. We only immediately see the servant arriving at his destinations. He's got camels with him. He's got 10 camels. He's got I'm sure that they're just packed with all of the gifts and everything that he has. And he makes it to outside the city of Nahor in the evening. And they're very important details, because this is actually a logical place for him to go to find this wife. In ancient customs, the young ladies would come out in the evening to the well to draw water for their families and the animals. That's what they would do, and they would come out in the cool of the evening. And if this servant is going to find a uniquely suitable young single lady, this is a great place and a great time for him to find her. It just works. He's sensible, he's wise. But let me show you how wise he is. The very first thing this servant does in verse 12 to 14 is pray. He's trusting the God who sends his angel before him. He prays. And look closely at this prayer. Notice, if you look through this prayer, a number of times he mentions his master, or specifically his master Abraham. He prays to the Lord, to Yahweh, God of my master Abraham. He knows that God's covenant promises are through Abraham, his master, and Isaac. And so he himself even bears the mark of this circumcision, the sign of this covenant. He's serving this faithful covenant-keeping God, believing in this covenant that goes through Abraham and Isaac, and praying to this covenant-keeping God in faith. This man's a believer. This man's a believer in God's promises. And his first request is for God to show his steadfast love. That word hesed, that's God's covenantal, promise-keeping love. Now, he's saying, please, Lord, show me the faithful love that is attached to your faithful promises in finding me this lady. And he seems to pray a very, very specific prayer in verse 14. Look at verse 14. When I say, please let down your jar that I may drink, let her say, drink, and I will water your camels. This man's on mission to find a girl, to find a wife for his master's son. And this girl who is in God's promised line, part of Abraham's family. By the way, where he says, this prayer, let down your jar that I may drink, and let her say, drink, and I will water you. That's not some open door theory, right? Lord, if I see a girl wearing a red dress, that's her. If I see a girl with a biker jacket over her arm, that's her. That's not some open door theory. That's not a biblical concept. It's not setting out some fleece as we know it. This man is on mission to find this girl, and he's trying to be faithful. He's trying to be wise. He's looking for certain qualities. Let's look at the qualities. Because he knows how a girl with the right qualities, with the right character will act in that time, in the customs of that time. So he prays to see them. Now, if you're single in our church, praying for a husband or a wife, please take note of his prayer. Please take note. When you look at this, you'll see that he's not praying to see someone that Isaac may or may not be attracted to, like a pretty biker girl at the front door. He's not praying for Isaac's subjective criteria of attraction. That's not even on his list. It's not on his list. Now, you might think it's a little bit strange. He's asking about her giving him a drink of water and watering 10 camels. But what he's actually doing is he's simply praying to see the outflow of her character. He wants to see the character of this girl. Is she welcoming? Is she friendly? Is she hospitable? Does she want to give him a drink? Does she have a servant's heart? Is she kind? Is she diligent? And he gets to see all of those things based on her answer to the question, can I have a drink? Imagine, right, if she says no. Are you kidding me? I had to walk all the way out here to this well. This is my family's water. It's hard enough to get it for them. And look, you're just going to have to get your own. And then walks on home. Not the girl for Isaac. She's not the one. What if she freely and generously gives him water? Yes. What if then she sees his camels, this older man's camels? He's an older man. And she says, let me water these 10 thirsty camels for you. 10 thirsty camels. That's not just one bucket of water stuck in a trough, okay? That's probably a significant time and labour commitment for a good portion of the evening. That's generosity, that's kindness, that's hospitality, that's diligence, that's patience, that's sacrificial serving right there. So beautiful. That would be like a young single guy today praying to see the godly qualities in a young lady as the outflow of her character, or vice versa. What would that prayer sound like if we were praying in today's custom and culture? It might sound something like this. Please, Lord, would you please show me a girl who is mature and actually serves others rather than requiring people to serve her? Please, Lord, would you please show me a girl who is leaning into her local church rather than going out on the town having fun with her friends? So-called fun. Please, Lord, would you please show me a girl who is friendly and welcoming to all sorts of people, not just her own clique? Please, Lord, would you show me a girl not caught up in the superficial surface ideals of designer clothes and cosmetic beauty, but who has a life that displays your godliness? Please, Lord, show me that girl. And please see what this wise servant looks for most for the choice of a wife. I think that's echoed all through the scriptures. I think we find it in 1 Peter 3 very, very clearly. 1 Peter 3, 3-4. Do not let your adorning be external, the braiding of hair and the putting on of gold jewellery or the clothing you wear, but let your adorning be the hidden person of the heart with the imperishable beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which in God's sight is very precious. That's attractive. That's attractive. And that man is looking for what will please the Lord in a wife for Isaac, trusting the Lord to deliver because he knows that God is going before him. And so he can trust God in this. And remember that Abraham told him the angel of the Lord would go before him. So look at verse 15. Before he finished speaking, before it's even over, before the words are off his lips, here is God answering, graciously answering. And for the first time in chapter 24, we see Rebecca. And the servant doesn't yet know who she is. He doesn't know what family she's from, but we see her. And she's described, by the way, as beautiful. As beautiful. That's not, Isaac has seen her beautiful subjectively. She's just beautiful, objectively. Just like Sarah, Abraham's wife, was beautiful. That kind of got him into trouble, remember? And he kind of deceived people around that, trying to stay safe because he had a beautiful wife. Guess what? Isaac is now going to have a beautiful wife that's going to put him under the same test next chapter. And then in verse 17, and by the way, it also says she's a virgin. God is protecting the integrity of his covenant line with this girl. And then in verse 17 to 20, she responds to his prayer. God responds to his prayer. She's responding to his question. She gives water for both he and his camels. And look at verse 21. It's just so beautiful. This is really nice. The servant, and I'm picturing this elderly, wise man who's probably struggling physically, even himself, maybe, I don't know, but I'm just picturing this man just sitting there, just meditating. He meditates on, he looks at her doing this, and I think he's just wondering, Lord, is this your answer? I mean, I think there's expectation in this. He's got anticipation that this is God's answer. Look, she's got these qualities. And so in verse 22 to 25, he then gives her this amazing gift. The gift that he gives her, like all of the gold jewels and everything that she has, it's way extravagant for the work that she's done in watering the camels. It's not just, what you'd normally pay for that. But it seems in anticipation for what he expects to hear. He expects to hear that she is from Abraham's line. I think there's an anticipation here. But regardless, this man is so happy. She already has all of the qualities, the character qualities that make her an attractive choice for a wife. And so I want to read to you the way that Dr. Richard Phillips, the commentator in Genesis, says this. I think he says it far better than I can. He says, these lavish gifts far exceed the cost of Rebekah's service, but in fact, they underestimated the value of her industrious and self-sacrificing woman. Christian women who seek the attention of godly and wise prospective husbands will do well to follow Rebekah's example rather than the shallow, sensual approach promoted in an unbelieving culture. What a great statement. Amen and amen, ladies. And she does indeed tell him then that she is the daughter of Bethuel from from Bethuel's father Nahor, which is Abraham's brother. This is the girl, he doesn't know it, I don't think, but this is the girl that is described in Genesis 22. She's the one. And the whole way this text is written, from Genesis 22 all the way through to the end of Genesis 24, it's just written in a way, if you were the original readers, you could not read this without saying, look at what God is doing. Look at how God orchestrates all of this. Look at how God works according to his sovereign will. This servant is acting obediently and faithfully, yes. He's acting with wisdom, yes. But God is simply using that as his means to bring about his will. So when you and I read this passage, brothers and sisters, we should say, look at God's providence. Look at God's steadfast covenantal love. Look at God's faithfulness. Look at God's sovereignty here. Look at the way God is putting together all of his groundwork of grace in bringing Rebekah and Isaac together so that you and I have Jesus. This is just stunning. And if you see that, then all of us could even just right now, just get on our knees right now and just echo the prayer of this servant who sees it for himself. Genesis 24, 26 and 27. The man bowed his head and worshipped the Lord and said, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who has not forsaken his steadfast love and his faithfulness toward my master. As for me, the Lord has led me in the way to the house of my master's kinsman." The Lord did this. How many of us would say, that was a good question I asked to find out that girl? This is a good idea of mine to come to the well in the evening. The Lord has led him in every aspect. And so we just have now a question on our lips. He's going to go back to Rebecca's family's house. Will she go with him? Will she actually go? Verse 28 to 61. God attracts his bride through irresistible grace. God attracts his bride through irresistible grace. This is the largest section. We're going to skim. I can only describe it. What happens here is Rebecca tells her family what just happened. And she doesn't know yet that this servant wants to take her to be Isaac's wife. That hasn't been explained. But what happens is her brother Laban, who seems to be more of the head of the household, his dad is probably really old, and so her brother Laban, who's a greedy man, we're going to find out later that he's a very greedy man, he sees the gifts of gold on Rebecca's arm and face and everything, and he just, wow, look at that, extravagant gifts, races out to meet this servant and bring him home for dinner. No doubt, he also saw all of the gifts on 10 camels being unloaded and all of that, all of those riches. And he sees riches as great blessing. That's why on his lips it's come in, blessed of the Lord. Why do you stand outside? Bring your blessing. Bring your blessing into me. And then he treats him very hospitably, water for their feet, has a table of food set out in front of this servant. But look at the immediate response of the servant in verse 33. I will not eat until I have said what I have to say. This man who just got up from his knees from praising God and seeing what the God of sovereign providence and grace had done is not going to mess around. He's on a mission. He's not doing anything until his priority is taken care of. And his priority is God. And through to verse 48, he then gives them this description of everything that has happened to this point. He starts by telling them about Abraham. Now, they should know who Abraham is. Abram, when he was called Abram, was called to follow Yahweh, and he left them to go do that. And now Yahweh has blessed him, and this servant describes how he has blessed Abraham and made him in fact very wealthy with flocks and herds and silver and gold and male and female servants and camels and donkeys. It's as if this servant is giving them every reason to let Rebecca go. And he also tells them aspects of this story that give real information about the covenantal promises that God has made to Abraham. I think we should probably expect that there's even more information than what is even told us here in Genesis 24, that in a conversation that happens. We get some evidence of that later in the text. I'll point that out. But here, he tells them, for instance, of Sarah bearing a son for Abraham in her old age when she was past childbearing years. He's talking to them about Isaac being the promised offspring brought about in miraculous ways for the sake of God's promises that he'd given Abraham. He tells them that Abraham forbid him from finding a wife from the Canaanites. They get to learn that Abraham is a man committed to living according to God's future promises and what those future promises are. He told them how Abraham said that God would send his angel before him and prosper his way back to bring back Isaac's wife. He even told them that if they would not give him Rebekah, if she would not come, that he would be free from his oath from Abraham. With Abraham, there was an expectation here in all of this, in what God was doing, that there would be willing participation. And then he told them his prayer and what happened with Rebekah at the well, and how she filled every aspect of the qualities, the character qualities he'd prayed for. How he was amazed at Rebekah to the degree that he got on his knees and worshipped God. He just recounts the whole thing. God bringing him to this exact girl from his master's family. And I think he's doing all he can right now to convince them that this is all the work of God's sovereign plan of grace. This is a gospel presentation of sorts. It would be impossible to convey this and not be a revelation of God and his grace. It's as if he's saying, listen, Abraham has been called of Yahweh, he's been blessed. Yahweh has made an eternal covenant with Abraham. Abraham's son is the continuation of that promise. Rebekah is most obviously the one called of God to continue his purpose through Isaac. How will you respond to this? And that's all we can do when we present the gospel to people too, right? Present them the facts of the gospel, the wonder of the gospel, and plead for the response of the gospel. In verse 50 to 51, here's their response. The thing has come from the Lord, from Yahweh. We cannot speak to you good or bad. Behold, Rebekah is before you. Take her and go, and let her be the wife of your master's son, as the Lord, as Yahweh has spoken. They're saying, if God has said this, what's the point of us saying anything, good or bad? If God is saying this, he's saying it's happening. What have we got to say about it? Who could we argue? This is God. The only answer is yes. And let me tell you, I don't even know what their spiritual condition is of this people. There's no reason to think that they're not the same idolatrous pagans that God called Abraham out of. But here's what I do know. God can turn the heart of the king. It's his sovereign calling, and he is sovereignly calling Rebekah out, and there's only one possible response then for this servant when he sees this in front of him. He doesn't say, oh, thank you, you're so kind. He gets down on his knees. He bowed himself to the earth before the Lord. Verse 52. He humbly bows in the presence of the sovereign hand of grace. What else could you do but get on your knees in humble adoration to this God? But it's not over. If you jump down to verse 55, the next day they make a request. Please let Rebekah stay with us another 10 days before you leave. And you look at that and you think, well, that's an understandable request, right? This mother and brother are losing their daughter and sister, and hey, give us another 10 days with her. That sounds reasonable, right? I think it is. But the servant insists that he leave straight away. Now, I don't really know what's going on in this servant's mind here, but I think he just sees God's hand so providentially, so sovereignly. He's saying, anything involved with what God is doing, I'm not messing around with it. I got to be on task here. Totally on task. Here's who this servant is. He's a no delay guy. He's a get it done guy. He's a don't mess around guy. And if you know Stephen Ham, I really like that guy. He's my kind of guy. When it comes to this is God's work and I'm not messing around with it. Anything involved here. And so this whole situation is God's providence showing us something more about Rebekah's heart. It shows us when it comes to her individual response, because it comes to her then. And I love her family, because her family are caring but not controlling. Caring but not controlling. Rebekah is marrying age. She is able to make some decisions on her own. She doesn't need to be controlled. And so they turn to her and say, well, verse 58, will you go with this man? Some of the most beautiful, simple words of Scripture come out. She said, I will go. I will go. And off she went. She takes a nurse, she takes young women with her. But it came down to Rebekah. She has individual responsibility before the Lord here. She's never met Isaac. What's she making her decision on? She's making her decision on the servant's account of the providence of God in finding a choice of wife for his covenantal promise. That's big. How is this not like a response of faith to follow not only this servant, not only Isaac, but she is agreeing to follow their covenant-keeping God? I think this is like Ruth following Naomi. This is the individual responsibility of the call of God. This is what the gospel has on people when we hear that we're sinners and we need reconciliation with God and forgiveness with God, and somebody tells us about the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, God's ultimate offspring, the Son who died in our place and rose from the dead. And then we call people to respond to that gospel. That's how we call people today, relying on God's call for them to say, I will go. And the family respond in verse 60 with something. This is where I think there's a bigger conversation that happened, because they tend to say something that we had heard that God made in his promises to Abraham back in Genesis 22. When God was assuring Abraham of his promises, he told Abraham that his offspring would possess the gates of his enemies. And now here are these people saying, hey, may this man, this son of this master, this offspring, possess the gates of his enemies. And whether they know it or not, they're right there declaring who Rebecca will ultimately be. She's going to ultimately be the mother of Jesus. And Rebecca, so we look at this and we see that Rebecca has become the bride of the offspring of promise through God's irresistible grace. What an amazing picture. God has used the faithfulness of this servant to go out with the truth and declaration of God's promise to draw his bride to himself. How is Rebecca not a beautiful picture of the church here? Just an incredible picture of the church. Well, let's finish quickly by letting me just finish by saying this from verse 62 to 67. Marriage is a perpetual picture of Christ and his church. Marriage is a perpetual picture of Christ and his church. You couldn't write a better script than this if you tried. These last few verses, there's this incredible scene. It's even romantic. Isaac is out in a field and he's meditating or he's praying. And I wonder if that prayer and meditation is in anticipation of receiving God's provision. But he sees out far, there's camels coming in from a distance. And it's the servant coming back with what Isaac may have even been praying for himself. And for Rebecca, this is the anticipation of God's choice for a husband. She sees this guy, she gets off the camel in readiness to greet him and asks the servant, who is this man walking in the field to meet us? Who's that man? There's expectation, there's anticipation in her statement. And the servant says to her, it's my master. It's Isaac, it's him, it's the one. It's as if he's saying, it's your future husband. And you know what she does immediately? She veils herself. Why? Because she adorns herself as a bride waiting for her husband. She's preparing for her husband. And the last verse might seem a little confusing. We're not told of any further wedding ceremony. We're also not told that one didn't happen, but we are told that Isaac takes her into his mother's tent, and that's an intentional statement. It shows that the family is all involved with that. There's a serious and true leaving and cleaving in this, which is what a marriage ceremony represents, a leaving and cleaving. She's already left her parents to cleave to the husband, and he is leaving his parents to cleave to his wife. And so there's this incredible respect for parents going into Sarah's tent. The marriage is then consummated. And there has been this leaving and cleaving, and the last words we read are these, and she became his wife and he loved her. So Isaac was comforted after his mother's death, the comfort of a dear wife, provided by the Lord in faithfulness to his covenant promises. Let me leave you with these couple of thoughts. I know that's been a whirlwind 67 verses, okay? But don't miss something very important. Rebecca is the bride moved by the irresistible grace of God to be presented to the offspring of promise and ends up in his tent in consummated glory. She's a picture of the church. Those called by the irresistible grace of God to follow him in complete subjection to his Son, the offspring of promise. And if you're married here today or you hope to be married one day, please don't miss this beautiful message. The faithful servant went out to find a bride for the offspring, and because of the faithfulness of this servant in proclaiming God's good news, God drew his bride to his offspring. And brothers and sisters, we now, as the church, like Rebecca, are that bride. Those who by God's grace have responded to his call. And we also are to go out like that servant, those called to faithfully take his call to the world and find more who will become his bride. And that's why Paul so diligently sees marriage this way. Ephesians 5:25-27, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word, so that he might present the church to himself in splendor, without spot or wrinkle or any such thing, that she might be holy and without blemish. And look, in God's continued fulfillment of his covenantal promises to Abraham, God doesn't just give the most beautiful picture, which is the central picture, the most exalted picture of the ultimate promised offspring, Jesus. He does give us this in Isaac, but he also gives us a beautiful picture of the ultimate bride of that offspring, which is pictured in Rebecca, the bride that is brought through his good news to be his, and who will one day be presented in splendor and holiness and at the great consummation. Brothers and sisters, that's who we are in Christ. It's beautiful. If you can't see anything else today, in this text, I'm asking you to see how beautiful God sees his bride who responds to his good news. Would you at least see that? How stunning is the marriage of Christ and his church? Would you all please see that? And be thankful for your marriages and seek the Lord in even in your singleness for what he might have before you in the future. Ephesians 5:31, therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This mystery is profound, and I am saying that it refers to Christ and the church. We can trust that God works through his people to irresistibly call his bride. Let's pray.